"You're not getting a dime," my father said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Forks froze. Glasses stopped midair. My mother didn't look at me. She kept her eyes down, like she already knew what was coming. The whole table went completely silent. Then, the lawyer cleared his throat. "My name is Rachel Donovan, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a paralegal, mostly behind the scenes, reading contracts and legal documents that nobody else bothers to understand. It's not glamorous work. It's not the kind of job people brag about at dinner parties. But it taught me something valuable. It taught me how to pay attention to the things that other people ignore. In my family, I was never the favorite, not even close. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who showed up early, stayed late, and helped clean up after every single family event. I was the one who drove my mother to her doctor's appointments, the one who helped my father organize his paperwork every single tax season, the one who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and every little detail that nobody else cared to remember. But I was never the one they praised, never the one they talked about with pride. My younger brother was the one they always talked about, the one they showed off at every gathering, every holiday, every chance they got. He was charming, he was loud, he was confident, and he knew exactly how to make my parents beam with pride. Every family dinner, every holiday meal, every phone call, it was always about him, his achievements, his promotions, his new car, his beautiful apartment. I would sit there, quietly eating my food, while they went on and on about how wonderful he was. And nobody ever asked about me. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect, something they never anticipated. For years, I told myself it didn't matter, that approval wasn't everything, that I didn't need their validation to feel good about myself. I would repeat those words in my head, like a prayer, every time I drove home alone from a family gathering, every time I sat in my car, in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to feel the sting of being overlooked. But deep down, I still hoped I belonged. I still hoped that one day someone in my family would look at me, really look at me, and say, "Rachel, we see you, and we appreciate everything you do." That day never came. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story is for you. If you've ever sat at a table surrounded by people who share your blood, but still felt completely and utterly alone, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about. You're not weak for wanting fairness. You're not dramatic for wanting to be seen. Subscribe if stories like this hit close to home, and hit like or hype if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you the most. Let me tell you how it all came apart. The betrayal happened at a family dinner, meant to celebrate my father's retirement. It was a Saturday evening in October. The air outside was cool and crisp, the kind of autumn evening that makes you want to curl up with a warm blanket and feel safe. But inside that dining room, there was no safety. The dining room smelled like roasted garlic and red wine, warm and heavy, the kind of smell that tricks you into thinking everything is fine, the kind of smell that wraps around you like a false hug. My mother had spent the entire day cooking. The table was set with the good china, the kind we only used for special occasions. Candles were lit. Music played softly in the background. Everyone was dressed nicely. Everyone was smiling. It felt, for a moment, like the kind of family gathering you see in movies. The kind where everyone loves each other and nothing bad ever happens. But this wasn't a movie. Halfway through dessert, my father tapped his glass with a spoon, and the room fell quiet. He stood up slowly, like he was about to give a speech. And that's exactly what he did. He announced his estate plans, like it was a toast, like he was raising a glass to something worth celebrating. He smiled while he did it, a wide, proud, self-satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, looking around the room, "and I've made some decisions about how things will be handled when I'm gone. My brother got the house, the savings, the investments, the retirement account, the vacation property, everything meaningful, wrapped up in a neat little speech about legacy and trust and family values." The room nodded along, like this was perfectly reasonable, like this was fair. Then my father looked straight at me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought maybe Just maybe. He was going to say something kind, something that acknowledged everything I'd done for this family. But instead he said, "Rachel's cut off. She doesn't need help." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Laughter followed. Awkward, approving laughter. The kind of laughter that tells you everyone in the room agrees with what was just said, but nobody has the courage to say it themselves. My aunt nodded, like she'd been expecting this. My cousin smirked, barely hiding the satisfaction on her face. My uncle raised his glass, like my humiliation was something worth toasting. My brother looked down at his plate, but he didn't say a word. Not one single word in my defense. He just sat there, accepting everything, like he deserved it. I felt small, smaller than I've ever felt in my entire life. Publicly dismissed, in a room that still smelled like a celebration I was no longer part of. The garlic and wine that had smelled so warm and inviting just minutes ago now made me feel sick. My hands trembled under the table. My throat tightened. My vision blurred, just slightly, from the tears I was refusing to let fall. I excused myself to the bathroom, shaking. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I gripped the edge of the sink with both hands and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, but I refused to cry. Not there. Not in that house. Not for them. I splashed cold water on my face. I took 3 deep breaths. I told myself, "Hold it together, Rachel. Just hold it together." When I came back to the table, the conversation had moved on, like nothing happened. Like my father hadn't just publicly erased me from the family's future. They were talking about dessert options and vacation plans, and my brother's upcoming promotion. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked if I was okay. But something had shifted. Something inside me had changed. A door had closed, and it was never going to open again. That's when the lawyer stood up. He was an older man, quiet, who had been sitting at the far end of the table the entire evening. I hadn't paid much attention to him before, but when he stood, the room noticed. He adjusted his glasses and said, "There are a few things we should discuss, privately." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Not now," he said. "We're celebrating." The lawyer sat back down, but the look on his face told me everything. This wasn't over. After that night, things escalated fast. Within days, the family dynamics shifted in ways I hadn't expected. I was removed from the family group chat within a week. Nobody told me directly. Nobody had the decency to say, "Rachel, we're removing you." I just noticed the silence on my phone. The absence of messages I used to scroll past without thinking. The messages about weekend plans. The messages about who was bringing what to the next gathering. The silly memes and birthday reminders and random updates about everyone's lives. All of it gone. Like I had been quietly deleted from my own family's story. I wasn't told about holidays until the last minute. Sometimes not at all. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it alone, in my apartment, eating leftover pasta and watching television, trying not to think about the empty chair at my family's table that used to be mine. I found out about Thanksgiving through a photo my cousin posted online. There they were, all of them, smiling around the table, looking happy and complete, like I had never existed. My mother called me 2 days later, not to apologize, not to say she missed me, not to ask how I was doing. She called to ask me to help financially, with property taxes on the house. The house I was excluded from. The house that was given to my brother. The house I would never own, never inherit, never benefit from. "You're good with money, Rachel," she said, her voice casual, like she was asking me to pass the salt. "Your brother's got a lot on his plate right now, you know how it is." I almost laughed. I almost laughed right into the phone, because the audacity of it was almost funny. Almost. My brother acted generous in public, while benefiting from everything behind the scenes. He posted about gratitude on social media. Long, thoughtful posts about how blessed he was to have such an amazing family. He talked about family values at church, standing up in front of the congregation, talking about love and loyalty and togetherness. And everyone believed him. Everyone thought he was this wonderful, generous, family-oriented man. Nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors. Nobody knew how I was being treated. They all assumed I'd accept it quietly, the way I always had. The way I'd accepted being overlooked for 34 years. I almost did. I came close. Really close. I sat with it for weeks, swallowing the bitterness like cold coffee every single morning. I would wake up, make my coffee, sit at my kitchen table, and feel the weight of everything pressing down on my chest like a stone. Some mornings, I couldn't even finish my breakfast. Some mornings, I just stared at the wall, wondering if this was just how my life was going to be. But something felt off. Not just emotionally, not just the hurt and the anger and the feeling of being discarded. Something else. Something in the paperwork didn't add up. Numbers that didn't match. Dates that seemed wrong. Signatures that looked different from what I remembered. And I would know because I had read those documents. What they didn't know was that I'd read every document years ago, back when my grandmother was still alive, back when I used to help her organize her files. I had seen everything, every amendment, every clause, every signature line, every footnote, every addendum, every revision. I had read them all, carefully, thoroughly, the way a paralegal reads things, not skimming, not glancing, reading, understanding every word, every implication, every legal consequence. They assumed I was weak. Because I stayed silent, they mistook my patience for defeat. They thought my quietness meant I had given up. They thought my silence meant I had accepted their decision. But they were wrong. So wrong. I had something they never saw coming. Not money, not connections, not powerful friends or expensive lawyers or social media influence. Damning evidence. The kind of evidence that changes everything. The kind of evidence that makes people go very, very quiet. I reached out to an old family lawyer named Gerald Hess, someone who'd handled my grandmother's paperwork long before my brother ever got involved in family finances. Gerald was a man in his early 70s, with silver hair, kind eyes, and hands that were slightly weathered from decades of turning pages and signing documents. He was retired, but he still had sharp eyes and a sharper memory. When I called him, he remembered me immediately. "Rachel," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "It's been a long time. How's your grandmother's estate?" "That's exactly why I'm calling," I said. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, a small round table with a checkered cloth, and 2 cups of black coffee between us. And I laid everything out. Every document I had kept, every copy I had made, every note I had taken. Over the years, he listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. Not once. He just sat there, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, turning pages slowly, carefully, deliberately. He asked questions no one else had thought to ask. Questions that made me realize I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Something was very wrong. "When was this amendment signed?" he said, pointing to a date on one of the documents. His finger tapped the page twice, because this notary stamp doesn't match the county records. I felt my heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," Gerald said, looking up at me over his glasses, "this document was either signed on a different date than what's recorded, or it was altered after the fact." Together, we compared documents side by side, spreading them out across his kitchen table, moving coffee cups aside, laying paper next to paper, line by line. Dates that didn't align, signatures that looked rushed, like someone had signed them quickly, without thinking. Clauses that contradicted the original trust my grandmother had established. Entire sections that had been added, or changed, or removed, without proper legal documentation. "Someone altered this," Gerald said quietly, leaning back in his chair. His face was calm, but his eyes were serious, and whoever did it assumed nobody would check. He paused, took a sip of his coffee, and then said something I will never forget. "They assumed nobody would check because they assumed nobody cared enough to look. But I cared. I always cared." Meanwhile, my family grew confident. They had no idea what was happening on my side. They planned vacations. They remodeled the kitchen in the house I was cut from, posting photos online of new countertops and fresh paint. They went on trips together, family outings I wasn't invited to, holidays I wasn't told about. They thought it was over. They thought I had accepted my place. They thought Rachel, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never made a fuss, had simply moved on. They were wrong. The confrontation happened in a legal setting, a conference room with fluorescent lights, and a long table that smelled like wood polish and old paper. The kind of room where important things happen, the kind of room where truths come out. It was a Tuesday morning. The sky outside was gray, heavy with clouds that looked like they might break open at any moment. My father sat on one side of the table, with my brother beside him. They both wore suits. My brother kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit I remembered from when we were kids. My mother stayed home. She said she didn't want to be involved, which was her way of being involved. Without taking blame, it was her specialty, standing on the sidelines, watching things happen, and then later claiming she had nothing to do with it. I sat on the other side with Gerald beside me. He had a leather briefcase, worn and old, with brass clasps that clicked when he opened them. Inside were folders, organized, labeled, detailed folders. My father barely looked at me. He tapped his fingers on the table, rhythmically, impatiently, like this was a waste of his precious time, like he had somewhere better to be. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice flat, dismissive, bored. Gerald nodded calmly and opened the first folder. Standard documents. Nothing surprising. The basic estate plan my father had announced at that dinner. My father glanced at the papers and leaned back in his chair, almost smug, almost satisfied, like he was thinking, "See? Everything is in order, just like I said." He even crossed his arms, a gesture of absolute confidence. Then, Gerald reached for a second envelope, a plain, white, unmarked envelope that had been sitting at the bottom of his briefcase the entire time. My father's jaw tightened. I saw it, the slight clench of his teeth, the barely visible twitch in his cheek. "That doesn't matter," he said quickly. "Too quickly. It's outdated." "It's notarized," Gerald replied, his voice steady, calm, and completely unshakable. "And it contradicts everything you filed." The room went still. My brother shifted in his seat. My father uncrossed his arms. Inside were amendments my father never disclosed. Documents my grandmother had signed before she passed, carefully, deliberately, with full legal authority. Documents naming M.E. as co-beneficiary of the original trust, not sole beneficiary. Co-beneficiary, meaning I was always meant to be included. I was always meant to receive my fair share. My father had buried them, not destroyed them, because destroying legal documents is a crime. And he knew that. Just hidden them, tucked them away, into a filing cabinet in his home office. A cabinet he assumed no one would ever open. A cabinet he thought was his little secret. But secrets have a way of surfacing. The room went quiet as the truth came out, page by page, clause by clause, word by word. Gerald laid each document on the table slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to read what was in front of them. My brother's smile vanished. It disappeared from his face, like someone had wiped it clean. He looked at our father, not with anger, not with understanding, but with the shock of a child who just realized the game was rigged in his favor all along, and someone had finally called it. "Dad," he whispered. His voice cracked, just slightly. "You told me it was settled. You told me everything was taken care of. You told me there were no other documents." My father said nothing, absolutely nothing. He stared at the papers, spread out in front of him, like they were ghosts, like they were things that were supposed to stay dead, but had come back to life. He realized, in that moment, what he'd ignored, what he'd hidden, what he'd hoped would stay buried forever. The color drained from his face. His hands, which had been tapping the table so confidently just minutes ago, were now completely still. They'd underestimated the wrong person. Not because I was loud, not because I was powerful, not because I had money or influence or connections, because I paid attention when no one else did, because I read the fine print, because I kept copies. Because I remembered. I didn't yell. I didn't celebrate. I didn't slam my hands on the table or point fingers or say, "I told you so." I gathered my copies, calmly, carefully, placed them back into my folder. I thanked Gerald with a handshake and a quiet nod, and I stood up. My chair scraped softly against the floor. My brother called my name. As I reached the door, "Rachel, wait." His voice was desperate, almost pleading. I paused, my hand on the door handle, but I didn't turn around. I could feel his eyes on my back. I could hear him breathing, shallow and fast. "We can talk about this," he said. "We can figure something out. We're family." I stood there for just a moment, and then I said, quietly, firmly, without a single trace of anger, "We already did." And I walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked down that hallway, knowing the truth was finally visible. Not hidden in a drawer, not buried under someone's convenience, not tucked away in a filing cabinet, gathering dust. Visible, out in the open, where it belonged. Some relationships didn't survive that day. And I won't pretend that doesn't hurt, because it does. It hurts to lose people you love, even when those people didn't love you the way you deserved. My father and I haven't spoken since. Not a call, not a text, not a word. His silence used to hurt me. Now, it just confirms what I already knew. My brother sent one text 3 weeks later. Just one. It said, "I didn't know." 3 words. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he genuinely had no idea what our father had done. Maybe he was just as shocked as he looked in that conference room. Or maybe he did know. Maybe he knew all along. And that text was just his way of clearing his conscience. It doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the years of being overlooked. It doesn't erase the laughter at that dinner table. It doesn't give me back the holidays I spent alone. But I survived. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And for the first time in my entire life, silence felt like peace. Not the silence of being ignored. Not the silence of being forgotten. Not the silence of sitting at a table where nobody asks how you're doing. This was a different silence. The silence of not needing anyone's approval to know my own worth. The silence of finally understanding that my value was never determined by the people who refused to see it. The silence of freedom. This story is about underestimation and exclusion. It's about what happens when people assume you're too quiet to fight back, too reliable to cause trouble, too kind to demand what's rightfully yours. If you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. This community wants to hear it. You're not the only one who sat at a table and felt like you didn't belong. You're not the only one who's been cut out, left behind, or made to feel like you didn't matter. Subscribe for more real-life stories like this. Stories about real people, facing real situations, and finding the strength to stand up for themselves. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting alone right now, wondering if they're the only one who feels this way. They're not. You're not. You're not invisible just because people refuse to see you. Their blindness is not your failure. This community is proof you're not alone. There are thousands of people right here who understand exactly what you've been through. Stay, listen, and share, because your story matters too. It always has, and it always will.